Somebody remove these girls from my gate right now. The words cracked across Terminal C like a thunderclap, loud enough to turn heads from the coffee stand to the boarding lane. For a moment, the airport seemed to freeze. Travelers stopped scrolling on their phones. A businessman lowered his newspaper. A mother waiting with her son looked up from her carry-on. And standing in the middle of it all were 12-year-old twin sisters Ava Carter and Aria Carter. They weren't running. They weren't arguing. They weren't causing a scene. They simply stood there holding their boarding passes, their backpacks resting neatly on their shoulders. The digital screen above the gate displayed the flight number to Los Angeles. Boarding had already begun. Yet somehow, these two girls had become the center of attention. Melissa Grant, the gate agent in charge, folded her arms tightly across her chest and stared at them with open suspicion. Her expression suggested she had already made up her mind before a single question had been answered. "I don't know what game you're playing," she said sharply, "but you're not getting on this airplane." Ava glanced at her sister. Aria squeezed her boarding pass a little tighter, but kept her composure. Their father had taught them something years earlier. Stay calm. Stay respectful. Let facts speak louder than emotions. So Ava answered politely. "Ma'am, our tickets were purchased weeks ago. We checked in online this morning." Melissa barely looked at the documents in her hand. That doesn't mean anything. Around them, passengers began whispering. Airports had a way of turning uncertainty into rumor in seconds. A man near the boarding lane muttered that maybe the girls were at the wrong gate. Another wondered whether they were traveling without permission. Each assumption seemed to grow larger than the last. The twins could feel the attention building around them like pressure before a storm. Yet neither girl moved. Neither girl cried. Neither girl raised her voice. The gate area was bright with fluorescent lighting, but suddenly it felt cold. Aria looked toward the jet bridge where passengers continued walking onto the aircraft. Every few seconds the scanner beeped as another traveler boarded successfully. Each beep sounded like a door quietly closing. Melissa took a step closer. "Where are your parents?" she demanded. "Our dad arranged everything," Ava replied. "He's expecting us in Los Angeles." Melissa let out a short laugh that wasn't friendly. "Sure he is." Several nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Something about the interaction didn't sit right. The twins looked prepared. Their paperwork was organized. Their luggage matched airline guidelines. Nothing about them seemed unusual except one thing. They were two black girls standing alone in a crowded airport while an adult with authority insisted they didn't belong. The tension thickened with every passing second. Above the gate, the final boarding countdown continued ticking away. And neither Ava nor Aria realized that within the next hour, this ordinary airport gate would become the center of a decision powerful enough to shake an entire airline. Ava could feel dozens of eyes on her, but the voice she remembered most was not Melissa Grant's. It was her father's. 3 days earlier, before either girl had packed a suitcase, David Carter had been standing in the kitchen of their Atlanta home pouring orange juice into 2 glasses while reviewing emails on his tablet. He had looked busy, the way he always seemed to be, yet somehow completely present at the same time. "Travel days can be unpredictable," he had told them. "Flights get delayed. People make mistakes. Systems fail. If anything feels wrong, stay together and call me." At the time, Aria had laughed and said nothing ever went wrong when Ava was around because Ava always had a plan. Their father smiled at that. "Then call me anyway." The memory felt strangely close now as they stood beside gate C-18 while passengers continued boarding behind them. Melissa remained planted in front of the scanner like a guard protecting a secret nobody understood. Every few moments she glanced toward the twins and then toward her computer screen as though searching for evidence that justified the conclusion she had already reached. The problem was that no such evidence existed. Ava knew it. Aria knew it. Even some of the passengers seemed to know it. Yet certainty and authority often looked identical from a distance. A tall man waiting near the window quietly approached the boarding lane. "Excuse me," he said carefully. "Those girls have been standing here for 20 minutes. Is there actually an issue with their tickets?" Melissa answered before he could finish. "Sir, this does not concern you." The man nodded slowly but did not look convinced. Nearby, a woman traveling with her teenage daughter frowned and whispered something under her breath. The atmosphere around the gate had shifted. What started as curiosity was turning into discomfort. People were beginning to notice the gap between what was being claimed and what they were actually seeing. Two polite girls. Two valid boarding passes. No explanation. No resolution. Just delay after delay. Arya glanced at the departure screen overhead. Boarding group 6 had already been called. Ava, she said softly, what if the plane leaves? Ava looked toward the jet bridge. For the first time, uncertainty crept into her voice. Dad said to stay calm. Arya nodded. She trusted her sister. She trusted her father. But trust became harder to hold when an entire airport seemed determined to question whether you belonged. Melissa suddenly picked up a phone and spoke quietly into the receiver. Her expression tightened. Then she hung up and looked directly at the twins. A supervisor is on the way, she announced. Maybe she can get the truth out of you. Around them, conversation stopped again. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Ava and Arya exchanged a glance. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Yet somewhere deep inside, both girls felt the same thing. Whatever happened next was going to change the course of this day. The supervisor arrived less than 2 minutes later, and somehow the atmosphere around Gate C-18 became even heavier. Karen Whitmore walked with the confidence of someone accustomed to being believed the moment she spoke. She carried a tablet under one arm and wore the expression of a person who had already decided what the outcome would be before hearing a single fact. Melissa immediately stepped forward. These are the girls I told you about, she said. Their story is not adding up. Karen's eyes moved from Ava to Arya and then to their backpacks. It was a quick glance, but the twins noticed it. She was not looking for information. She was looking for confirmation of a suspicion. How old are you? Karen asked. 12, Ava answered. And where exactly are your parents? Our father arranged our trip, Arya replied. He is meeting us in Los Angeles. Karen exchanged a look with Melissa. It lasted only a second, but it said more than words. Around them, passengers continued watching. Some pretended to check their phones while secretly listening. Others openly stared. Airports were strange places. A person could become a headline inside a terminal without anyone knowing the full story. Karen tapped something on her tablet and frowned. This reservation is marked as priority status, she said. That does not make sense. Ava blinked. Why would it not make sense? Karen ignored the question. Instead, she turned toward Melissa. Did they provide identification? Everything they showed looks unusual, Melissa replied. The answer was vague, but it seemed to satisfy Karen. The supervisor folded her arms. Until we verify everything, these passengers will not board. The word passengers sounded strange coming from her mouth. It sounded less like a description and more like a problem. A murmur spread through the waiting area. A man in a baseball cap shook his head. A woman sitting near the charging station frowned openly. The longer the situation continued, the less comfortable people became. Yet Karen appeared completely unconcerned. She seemed more interested in proving herself right than resolving the issue. There has to be a reason for this designation, she continued. People do not just receive this level of status. Ava looked directly at her. Maybe because our father earned it. For a brief moment, silence settled over the gate. Karen's expression hardened. Melissa let out a short laugh. Sure, she said. And I suppose he owns the airline too. A few passengers chuckled awkwardly. Others looked embarrassed by the comment. Arya lowered her eyes toward the floor. Not because she felt guilty, because she was beginning to understand something. Facts were no longer driving the conversation. Assumptions were. Every answer the twins gave seemed to create more suspicion instead of less. Karen suddenly turned toward a nearby employee station and picked up a phone. I want security standing by, she said. The words landed heavily in the air. Several passengers immediately looked at one another. Security? For two quiet girls holding valid boarding passes. Even Melissa appeared surprised by how quickly things were escalating. Yet nobody stopped it. Nobody in authority questioned it. The boarding countdown continued ticking away overhead, while the gap between truth and perception grew wider with every passing minute. The word security seemed to change everything. Not because anyone believed Ava and Arya had done something wrong, but because authority has a way of making doubts spread faster than facts. Within minutes, the gate area felt less like a boarding zone and more like a courtroom without rules. Travelers who had never spoken to the twins suddenly formed opinions about them. A man near the charging station quietly shook his head and muttered that there had to be more to the story. Another passenger suggested that airlines did not stop people from boarding without a reason. The assumptions multiplied with every passing second. Ava stood perfectly still. Arya remained beside her. Yet the crowd around them was beginning to decide who they were before hearing a single piece of evidence. Karen Whitmore seemed encouraged by the shift. She moved closer to the counter and spoke with the confidence of someone who believed the room was finally on her side. "People do not get flagged for no reason," she said loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear. "There are procedures for situations like this." The statement sounded official. It sounded reasonable. That was exactly what made it dangerous. Because procedures were being discussed while facts were being ignored. Across the gate area, a teenager raised his phone and began recording. Moments later, another passenger did the same. The story was spreading beyond the terminal now. People were posting clips online, each one trying to explain what they thought was happening. Some comments defended the girls. Others assumed the airline must know something the public did not. The truth became buried beneath speculation. Arya felt the pressure building. She looked toward the jet bridge again. Fewer passengers remained in the waiting area now. Boarding was nearly complete. Every minute felt heavier than the last. Then something unexpected happened. A young employee working at a nearby service desk stopped watching from a distance and stepped forward. Her name tag read Olivia Brooks. She looked no older than 23. Unlike everyone else, she was not staring at the twins. She was staring at the computer screen. Olivia had spent the last several minutes reviewing information she was never supposed to notice. The reservation record, the account history, the travel profile. The details told a very different story from the one being repeated at the gate. Olivia walked carefully toward Karen. "Excuse me," she said. "I think there may be a mistake." Karen immediately frowned. "What kind of mistake?" Olivia hesitated for only a second. "Their reservation is valid." Silence spread through the gate. Even Melissa looked surprised. Olivia continued. "The tickets were purchased properly. The account is active. There are no alerts or restrictions attached to the booking." Several passengers exchanged glances. Suddenly, the narrative that had seemed so certain began to crack. Karen's expression hardened. "You are looking at information outside your responsibility." Olivia swallowed but did not back away. "I am looking at facts." The words landed with surprising force. For the first time all afternoon, someone inside the system had challenged the story being told. Ava looked at Olivia. Arya did too. Neither girl smiled. Neither celebrated. But for the first time since the confrontation began, they no longer felt completely alone. And somewhere beneath Karen's confident exterior, a small hint of uncertainty began to appear. Karen Whitmore did not like being challenged, especially in front of a crowd. The moment Olivia Brooks spoke up, the supervisor's confidence seemed to sharpen into something colder. "Return to your station," Karen said firmly. "This situation is being handled." Olivia remained where she was. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed steady. "With respect, it is not being handled correctly." A quiet gasp moved through the gate area. Passengers who had been watching from a distance suddenly leaned closer. It was one thing for travelers to question what was happening. It was something entirely different when an employee inside the system did the same. Karen's expression hardened immediately. "You are overstepping your role." Olivia swallowed. "Maybe, but the reservation is valid." The words echoed through the waiting area like a crack in a wall that had seemed solid only moments earlier. Melissa looked away from the crowd and back toward her screen. For the first time all afternoon, she appeared uncomfortable. Yet neither she nor Karen offered an explanation. Instead, Karen doubled down. She picked up her phone and quietly requested an additional review from airport operations. The move sounded official. It sounded procedural. But everyone could feel what was really happening. The goalposts were moving. Every time the twins answered a question, another question appeared. Every time a fact surfaced, another delay followed. Ava felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She was only 12 years old, yet she understood something many adults never learned. Sometimes people stopped listening long before a conversation began. Beside her, Arya stared toward the polished airport floor. The reflection of the overhead lights stretched across the tile like endless lines. Suddenly, she remembered another moment from years earlier. 4th grade, a statewide academic competition. She and Ava had scored higher than anyone expected. When the results were announced, one adult had quietly asked whether there had been a mistake. The memory had stayed with her, not because of the question itself, but because of what sat behind it. Surprised that she could succeed. Surprised that she belonged there at all. now standing inside one of the busiest airports in America. The feeling was painfully familiar. Different place, different faces, same doubt. Arya tightened her grip on her boarding pass. Ava noticed and gently squeezed her sister's hand. Neither spoke. They did not need to. The silence between them carried years of understanding. Across the gate area, several passengers began openly questioning Karen's decisions. A woman near the window shook her head. This has gone on long enough. A businessman closed his laptop and stood up. If their tickets are valid, why are they still standing here? The questions kept coming. Karen answered none of them. Then a uniformed airport representative appeared at the far end of the concourse and started walking toward the gate. Melissa straightened immediately. Karen looked relieved. Passengers turned to watch. Whatever happened next would either end the situation or push it somewhere nobody expected. Ava looked at Arya one more time. The boarding clock above the gate continued counting down. And for the first time all afternoon, both sisters reached the same conclusion. It was time to call their father. Ava reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. The movement was small, almost ordinary, yet it felt as though the entire gate noticed. Conversations quieted. Even the passengers who had been arguing about the situation seemed to pause. Across the counter, Karen Whitmore watched carefully. Melissa folded her arms again. Neither woman appeared concerned. To them, this was just another attempt to explain a story they had already dismissed. Ava scrolled through her contacts and pressed a single name. Dad. The call connected almost immediately. No ringing. No delay. David Carter answered on the first tone. Hey, sweetheart. His voice was calm, warm, and completely unhurried. For a second, the noise of the airport seemed farther away. Ava swallowed. Dad, they will not let us board. Silence followed. Not confusion. Not panic. Just silence. David Carter was not a man who reacted before understanding. He listened. Are you and your sister safe? He asked. Yes. Are you together? Yes. Good. Another brief silence settled between them. Around the gate, people strained to hear. Karen exchanged a look with Melissa as though expecting some dramatic confrontation. None came. David's voice remained steady. Put me on speaker. Ava did. The phone rested in her hand as his voice carried softly through the gate area. Can someone explain why my daughters are not on their flight? Karen immediately stepped forward. Sir, we are conducting a review of their travel status. David did not interrupt. He simply waited. The silence forced Karen to continue. There are concerns regarding their reservation. What concerns? He asked. Karen hesitated. For the first time all afternoon, she sounded less certain. We are verifying information. David spoke again. His tone never changed. Have they presented valid boarding passes? Karen glanced toward Melissa. Yes. Have they provided identification? Yes. Have they violated any airline policy? The question lingered. Karen did not answer right away because she could not. Several passengers noticed. So did Olivia Brooks. Finally, Karen said, Not exactly. David remained silent for another moment. It was the kind of silence that made people uncomfortable because it left them alone with their own answers. Then he spoke directly to Ava and Arya. You both remember what I told you. Stay calm. Arya replied quietly. And stay together. Exactly right. A faint smile crossed Olivia's face. Nearby passengers exchanged glances. Something about the conversation felt different. Most parents would have argued. Most would have demanded explanations. David Carter did neither. He sounded like a man gathering information, not seeking permission. I am going to handle this, he said. Do not leave the gate. Do not argue with anyone. Just wait for me to make a few calls. Karen almost laughed. Sir, with respect, there is a process. David's response came immediately. I am aware of the process. Then the line went quiet. The call ended. For several seconds nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The terminal hummed with distant announcements and rolling luggage. But gate C-18 felt frozen in place. Melissa shook her head. Karen looked unconcerned. Yet somewhere far beyond the terminal, phones were already beginning to ring. For almost 2 minutes after the call ended, nothing happened. At least that was how it appeared from the outside. Karen Whitmore returned her attention to the counter. Melissa Grant folded her arms once again. The airport representative who had arrived moments earlier quietly reviewed notes on a tablet. To them, the situation seemed under control. 2 girls. 1 delayed boarding decision. 1 frustrated parent on the phone. The story should have ended there. Then the first phone rang. It belonged to the airport representative. He glanced at the screen and immediately stepped away from the gate to answer. His posture changed before he even spoke. A minute later, Karen's phone vibrated. She looked down, frowned, and answered. Karen Whitmore speaking. The confidence in her voice lasted exactly 3 seconds. Passengers could not hear the person on the other end, but they could see Karen's expression change. Her shoulders straightened. Her eyes narrowed. She stopped talking and started listening. When the call ended, another one arrived almost immediately. Then another. Melissa noticed. "What is going on?" she asked quietly. Karen did not answer. Across the terminal, the departure board suddenly updated. The flight status remained active, but the final boarding countdown stopped moving. Several passengers noticed at the same time. A businessman standing near the charging station checked his watch. "Why are we holding the flight?" he asked. Nobody seemed to know. More phones began ringing. The airport representative received another call. Then a supervisor from operations arrived at the gate. Minutes later, someone from regional management appeared. The movement was subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Employees who had never shown interest in Gate C-18 suddenly seemed very interested. Conversations became shorter. Faces became more serious. Olivia Brooks watched the scene unfold with growing disbelief. She had worked at the airport long enough to recognize the signs. Something significant was happening behind the scenes. Something far above her pay grade. Karen stepped aside and answered yet another call. This time, passengers could hear fragments. "Yes, they are still here." Pause. "No, they have not boarded." Another pause. "I understand." Her voice sounded completely different now. The certainty that had defined her all afternoon was fading. Ava and Arya remained exactly where they had been told to stay. Calm. Together. Watching. Waiting. Neither girl smiled. Neither celebrated. They simply observed the growing ripples spreading through the airport. It was like watching a storm form far away on the horizon. You could not see the center yet, but you could feel its influence everywhere. Then came the moment that changed everything. A man wearing a senior operations badge approached the gate at a brisk pace. He spoke quietly with the airport representative, then with Karen, then with Melissa. Whatever he said caused all three of them to fall silent. The man looked directly toward Ava and Arya, not with suspicion, not with doubt, with recognition. Around the gate, passengers sensed the shift immediately. The crowd that had once questioned the twins was now questioning the people who had stopped them. The story was turning. Nobody knew exactly why. Nobody knew exactly who David Carter was. But one thing had become unmistakably clear. His call had not started an argument. It had started a chain reaction. And somewhere far above Gate C-18, people with real authority were now paying very close attention. The gate had gone strangely quiet. Not silent, because airports were never truly silent, but the kind of quiet that settles over a room when everyone senses that something important is about to happen. Karen Whitmore stood near the counter holding her phone with both hands. Melissa Grant remained beside her, though the confidence she had displayed earlier was gone. The senior operations manager who had arrived minutes before was now speaking rapidly with people through an earpiece. Every conversation seemed urgent. Every expression seemed serious. And at the center of it all stood Ava and Arya Carter, two 12-year-old girls who had done nothing except show up for a flight. Then another figure appeared from the concourse. This one carried no luggage and wore no airport uniform. His suit was simple. His badge displayed executive-level credentials. The moment several employees saw him approaching, their posture changed. He stopped directly in front of the gate counter and looked first at Ava and Arya. His expression softened immediately. Then he turned toward Karen. "Are these the passengers involved?" he asked. Karen nodded. "Yes." The executive took a slow breath. "Do you know who their father is?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Nobody answered. Melissa glanced toward Karen. Karen glanced toward the operations manager. The silence itself became an answer. The executive looked around the gate area. Passengers leaned forward. Even Olivia Brooks stopped breathing for a moment. Then the man spoke clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Their father is David Carter." The name meant nothing to some people. To others, it triggered instant recognition. A businessman near the charging station straightened immediately. Another passenger quietly whispered, "Wait, that David Carter." The executive nodded once. Chief Executive Officer. Majority Stakeholder. Chairman of the airline board. The words spread through the gate faster than any announcement ever could. Faces changed instantly. Passengers who had spent the afternoon watching a mystery suddenly understood why the airport seemed to have frozen. Karen's expression lost all color. Melissa stared at the floor. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, as though confirming something she had suspected for quite some time. The executive continued. A review was conducted immediately after Mr. Carter's call. There was no issue with the reservation, no issue with the tickets, no issue with identification, no issue with airline policy. Each sentence landed heavier than the one before it. Around the gate, nobody spoke. They simply listened. These passengers should have been boarded without delay. Karen attempted to respond. We were only following procedure. The executive looked directly at her. Procedure begins with facts. Silence followed. The kind of silence that arrives when excuses stop working. Then the executive turned toward Ava and Arya. His voice became gentler. Your father asked me to personally apologize for what happened today. He also asked me to tell you that he is very proud of how you handled yourselves. For the first time all afternoon, a faint smile appeared on Arya's face. Ava remained calm, but relief finally reached her eyes. Then the executive delivered the sentence that changed everything. Mr. Carter said something during our call that I believe everyone here should hear. He said, "You saw two black girls traveling alone. I saw my daughters." Nobody moved. Nobody looked away. Because in that moment, the entire gate understood that this story had never been about tickets. It had always been about belonging. For several seconds after the executive finished speaking, nobody at gate C18 seemed to know what to say. The terminal continued moving around them. Flight announcements echoed through distant hallways. Rolling suitcases clicked across polished floors. Airport employees moved between gates. Travelers checked departure screens and hurried toward connections. Yet inside that small section of the airport, time felt suspended. The story that had begun with suspicion had ended with clarity. The assumptions were gone. The facts remained. What only an hour earlier had looked like a routine boarding dispute had become something much larger. It had become a reminder of how quickly people can form conclusions and how difficult it can be to undo them once they take hold. The executive stepped aside and received another call. Moments later, he returned with a calm expression. Your father would like to speak with you again. Ava accepted the phone. David Carter answered immediately. Hey girls. This time there was a smile in his voice. The tension that had been present earlier had disappeared, replaced by the steady confidence of a father who knew his daughters had handled themselves with grace. Hi, Dad, Arya replied. You both did exactly what I hoped you would do, he said. You stayed calm. You stayed together. And you never let someone else's opinion decide who you are. Around them, passengers listened quietly. Nobody seemed interested in boarding anymore. They were listening to a father speak to his daughters. Several people, who had initially watched out of curiosity, now listened with genuine respect. Were you worried? Ava asked. David laughed softly. Of course I was worried. I am your father. That is part of the job description. A few nearby passengers smiled. Even Olivia Brooks could not hide her grin. Then David's voice became more serious. I want you both to remember something. The world will sometimes tell people they do not belong. Sometimes it does it loudly. Sometimes it does it quietly. But belonging is not something another person gives you. It is something nobody can take away. The words settled over the gate like sunlight breaking through clouds. The executive nodded respectfully. Several passengers lowered their phones. Some had started recording earlier when the situation seemed controversial. Now the devices slowly disappeared back into pockets and handbags. The moment no longer felt like a scandal. It felt like a lesson. A lesson that many adults needed as much as the young girls standing near the gate counter. David continued speaking. Your worth is not decided by a stranger's assumptions. It is not decided by a title, a uniform, or a first impression. It comes from who you are when nobody is watching. Ava glanced at her sister. Arya smiled slightly. They had heard versions of that lesson before. But hearing it now, after everything that had happened, made it feel different. Made it feel real. Within minutes, arrangements were completed. The flight crew was informed. The boarding process resumed. This time, there were no delays. No questions. No obstacles. As Ava and Arya approached the scanner, the same device that had seemed impossible to reach only an hour earlier produced a simple green light. One soft beep. Then another. The sound was ordinary. Yet after everything that had happened, it felt meaningful. It was not just permission to board an aircraft. It was confirmation of something that had always been true. Passengers waiting nearby stepped aside to let the girls pass first. A businessman nodded respectfully. The woman traveling with her daughter offered a warm smile. An elderly traveler quietly said, "Have a wonderful trip." Olivia stood near the gate entrance and quietly said, "Have a great flight." "Thank you," Ava replied. "Thank you for speaking up," Arya added. Olivia's eyes glistened slightly. "You are welcome." Behind them, the executive remained near the counter speaking with airport leadership. Reviews would follow. Conversations would happen. Lessons would be learned. Policies would be discussed. Reports would be written. But those things belonged to tomorrow. Today belonged to two sisters who had handled a difficult moment with dignity beyond their years. As they walked toward the jet bridge side by side, the terminal seemed brighter somehow. Not because anything about the building had changed, but because the truth was finally visible. The most powerful thing David Carter gave his daughters was not influence, position, or authority. It was certainty. Certainty that they belonged wherever their character, effort, and dreams carried them. A certainty strong enough to withstand doubt, criticism, and unfair judgment. And as the aircraft door closed behind them, one truth remained impossible to ignore. The people who doubted them remembered a reservation number. The people who understood the lesson remembered two young girls who never stopped believing in their own worth. Long after flight schedules changed and gate assignments were forgotten, that would be the part of the story people carried home with them.